Doing well. I'm doing well. How are you?
It's been a whirlwind today.
As it,
Ah, how has it been preparing for the release of the book?
it has been a whirlwind. It is it's definitely moving along. There are a lot of moving parts, and I'm learning as I'm going. But it's exciting. It's exciting. I got the proof copy the other week, so having like a real tangible product in my hand was like pretty mind blowing. But it's
Right?
exciting. Yep.
So how long have you been working on the book? And I guess we should tell everybody the name of the book.
Yes, it is Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World.
Mhm. Yeah. And then, so how long have you been working on it?
It's funny, the concept started as an idea for a course for the design program, the interior design program I had actually come through at Marymount University. But I pivoted. I was giving thought to that whole process, but a couple things came up, and I decided I'm going to make this into a book. So I started writing in January of last year, and I was finished by July.
Wow.
Yep. So then all the in between time has been figuring out how to publish, finding the publisher, getting all of the steps of that process. So it's one thing to write the book, a whole other thing to get it out in the world. So that's where I
Yeah.
am now.
So do you feel that when you went through the actual process of making the book, it was like this world that you were not privy to all of the detail?
Yes, it definitely. I mean, the writing part, it's so, I talk to a lot of people who are like, oh, I could never write a book. And they think like that's the most strenuous part of this. And for me, it wasn't actually that hard only because I write regularly. I have a blog and I have a writing background. So that wasn't too stressful, but it was a lot around figuring out, do I go with a traditional publisher? Do I do self-publishing, which is what I ended up doing? And then like figuring out the mechanics of the whole process. So fortunately, I found a hybrid publisher, which I didn't even know about that. I didn't
Didn't know
even
that
know that was a
existed.
thing.
Yeah.
And they've helped me in terms of figuring out the cover design. That I hadn't thought about the interior layout specifically. We got down to conversations about fonts and the color schemes and all of that, which of course as a designer I enjoyed that part, but
So it was easy for you to make a decision.
it was relatively easy because I hadn't noticed, but before when I would read books, I would look at the overall display once again, like I think designers do. So
Uh-huh.
there were certain design features that I liked from other books I had read that I wanted to incorporate into my book. But it was nice to have designers to work with who could help me narrow my focus and, make it all real. And pulling, I had a lot of inspiration books, a lot of inspiration images and things like that I was able to hand off. So I was glad to be able to hand all that off to a professional.
Gotcha. Okay. And so how does it feel to have the team that's helping you put things together? Like you said, they were helping you make these decisions.
Yeah. That's been actually amazing because I'm used to doing everything on my own. In addition to working for someone for the past 20 something years, I've also had my own business in interior design and doing my interior design and color consulting business. So I'm used to feeling like everything is on me. Like I need to make the decisions. I need to figure out all of the minutia. I need to, everything it has felt like was on me. But it was nice to kind of hand that over to someone else. And it's interesting, too, because I think about how I work with my design customers. A lot of them are like, oh, I have ideas, but I'm overwhelmed. I'm not sure which way to go. So they bring me in. You have that unbiased third party that can usually help figure things out and give people a path. And I realized I needed that, too. And it's been nice to feel supported by other people.
We all need that from time to time. That's why I find it's very hard to work on my things because of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's part design, part therapy. Is what's happening.
Yes. It really is. And I realized that too when I started doing my interior design consulting. It's funny, this whole concept, when you really take a step back and look at it, I meet a client, somehow we connect online. The first time we meet is in the privacy of their home. I have a very short amount of time to build trust, to make them feel comfortable with me being there. Then we get into like the most intimate spaces in their homes, and I need to ask them, how do you use this space? You know, what is your vision for this? So I feel like that experience has made me a better consultant overall, even in my management consulting work and my DEI work too.
We could talk for a very long time about how our processes are probably very similar, but we've never really had an in-depth conversation to know that.
Right.
I just want to take 1 second to take a pause and realize that we kind of match, right? A little bit. We both got the backgrounds. So you're muy judged. Yeah. We plan this, everybody. We plan because we're designers. So it is Black History Month, and one of the things that helped me start AAGD is trying to revive Black identity in many ways. And when you allowed me the privilege of just reading an excerpt of your book, I really thought for the first time that this is like, identity through design thinking. And I wanted to know if that was your approach, and how did you come up with the integration of both?
Yeah, it's always been interesting because I think I've always been aware of my identity in all the spaces I've been in. And, especially as designers, we're usually one of very few who look like us. So I feel like I've always had that awareness. But it was really when I got into my work doing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work, I started thinking about how those concepts are actively applied. Okay. And it really made me start reflecting on the practice of design in general. So, as I mentioned, I have a background in interior design, but I also have had exposure to different disciplines of design, like product design, graphic design, and some UI, UX design. And I started thinking about how we don't really talk about identity in those design spaces. If we do, it's usually an afterthought. We get to the end of the whole design process and somebody's like, oh, wait a second, do we think about such and such? Or, there's a focus group, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, who should we have in the focus group? And then the discussion about diversity comes up. Or, it seems like it's always something that's kind of tangential to the process if it comes up at all.
Right.
And I've really just started thinking about how we are not taught, even going back to our design education, to intentionally bring identity into the conversation during the design process, to even stop and think about what aspects of the identity of the end user should we be keeping in mind. Are we having conversations with them to find out what's important to them? And I think some design I've seen, well, there are pretty fair amount of instances of this. The end product has been very performative in trying to represent anything about a culture or identity. And there is damage and harm in doing that. So I really started looking at the design process and saying, where do we need to intentionally insert this dialogue about identity, not just from from the point of saying, okay, well, we asked up front and they told us some stuff, but in the actual process of coming up with the concept and going back and validating our, as a designer, our interpretation of what was important to the customer, bringing them into to co-create. When we finally get through the process, checking in again, did we get it right? And intentionally creating those opportunities for those discussions.
That gave me something that I never thought about, and I'm going to love to have this conversation with you. I just wanted to check in to make sure that no one else had any questions. You are more than welcome to ask us questions. We will see it. We have Camille helping us out, so she'll make sure that we see the questions. So, as a designer, when you're going to a project, how do you bring your identity to the table? Well,
I think as a designer, and this is something I explore in the book too, I typically have not necessarily, I guess, been fully open and talking about my own identity in the process, quite honestly. I think in a lot of the spaces I've been in, identity hasn't been on the table, period. And if it has, there have been very few people I've actually been comfortable engaging in that conversation with. Or, very few spaces where I felt like I could fully open the door to that kind of conversation and feel like my perspectives would be heard and valued. And it was funny to me too when I started pulling together the concepts for the book, and like I said, creating the questions that we should ask customers throughout the design process. I realized, like, I haven't been asking my clients those questions either.
Do you feel like a lot of designers, like, we're not asking ourselves those questions?
I think we are, because we get so many signals that say, don't touch this, like, do not touch, do not get into this conversation. It's not like, and I will speak, generally from my experience and the experience of a lot of designers I've spoken to, that identity is kind of off the table. Like, it's not something that we dive into when we're talking about, even in programming in interior design, where we are literally gathering requirements, where we are talking about the customers, their needs, how they use the space, etc.
Hold on for 1 minute. I can't hear you for some reason.
Oh, okay.
Let me find out what's going on.
I hear a little buzz.
Okay, could you say something one more time?
Is that better?
Yeah. It might have been my headphones. I'm so sorry about that. What were you saying about identity and bringing, not really being able to bring identity to the table? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like we talk about everything else about customers, like, oh, how do they use this space? What do they typically do here? But we don't talk about what about their identity they would like to see represented in the space, or how do we signal to them that we honor their identity in this space?
Okay. So then, teaching people to honor their identity in spaces. This is something that I believe you stress in your book. Okay. And so, at what level do you believe designers from all backgrounds should learn this? Is it at the college level? Should they be getting the book after college? Is this something that we teach at an earlier stage?
I think that it should definitely be part of our design education, period. Like, this should be something that's introduced as soon as we are learning everything else about design and what it means, and the importance of it overall. And honestly, I feel like anytime there's conversation about design, this should be part of it, that this should be part of the overall dialogue. But definitely as designers, I think that because we're in school to learn, we should be learning to have that dialogue in our design education as well. A lot about DEI and a lot about, changing our practices and making things more inclusive in the spaces that we're in requires practice. So why not start in design education? Why not start having these conversations in studios? I know that the program that I was in for my interior design degree, we were fortunate enough to have a lot of international students in the program, but there was never space given for them to share anything about their perspectives, about their upbringing, about what was meaningful to them in the classes. Even when we're talking about things as, spaces as intimate as like residential spaces and residential design, there was, we just learned the standard kind of cookie cutter approach to what a family should look like. So how their house should be designed, what kind of spaces they should have, instead of thinking about the different cultural aspects that can shift from one group to another.
Right.
Having that conversation about cultures where there are multi-generational households, and that is the norm. That is not something that we retrofit an office or a guest room to make it a permanent space for parents. No, that is accepted, that they are part of the household. They have their own space from the start when you talk about design. Right. But we're all just taught such cookie cutter approaches that are very Western focused, very Eurocentric in terms of how people use anything from a space to a product, and everything in between.
Yeah. Um, I was trying to figure out how do we. I'm trying not to be pessimistic. That's why I'm
Okay.
I'm trying to be diplomatic. I don't have faith in in institutions implementing the things that they should implement to cause the change that they need to. So, as an individual, I want to know when I approach a client, how, how can I utilize the information in the book to start making a part of my daily practice?
Yes, very good question, and that is actually the focus a lot of how what I call the design for identity blueprint is presented. It is very strategically and deliberately framed around a list of questions to ask at different phases of the design process.
Oh,
To so it's not prescriptive. It's not like saying, if you're talking to people of this background, say this, ask this. It's not like a recipe. It is really meant to provide questions to open the door to have those kinds of conversations. So even from the start, there is a question about how would you like your identity represented in whatever we're creating? And I think that gives a lot of freedom, because that conversation could go either way. It could be that the customer themselves may be like, I'm not really comfortable going there, or I don't feel like there's something specific to my identity that needs to be represented in the final product. It opens the door intentionally for that. And it's funny because I just started using that question myself with interior design clients.
well,
And I saw that I think it takes people off guard, because we don't talk about that.
yeah. So can you share one of the stories? Because I'm sure being caught off guard, people have to dig deeper, and they're like, I didn't expect to be here.
Yes, it's actually one. It was a recent residential project, and I was talking to an older Black couple, and I asked the question. I was working with them to redesign their kitchen, and they literally look like, well, what do you mean exactly? And I shared with them. I was like, our homes are our private space. So we should feel free to represent any aspect of ourselves that we want in our homes, whether that's something that's reminiscent of where you grew up, whether it's something that is meaningful to you according to you. I mean, it could be anything according to your ethnic or racial background, around your lifestyle, related to your sexual orientation. It could be anything, something that reminds you of where you came from in terms of your socioeconomic status. It could be anything that is meaningful to you. And it was really interesting, just, the conversation that opened up. And one of the things, it was funny because we were talking about trends in design, and, kind of going back to what's kind of cookie cutter in terms of interior design today. And one of the things that that the wife had mentioned in the conversation was, do not bring any kind of barn doors into my house. Like, I see them everywhere. You got these sliding doors. It's supposed to be a thing. She was like, I grew up on a farm. A barn door belongs on a barn, not in my house.
Right.
So, it just kind of opened that dialogue for those things, and like what resonates with you that is meaningful, but also what things do you not want to see? What things do not align with your vision of what your space should be, or what is, just personally meaningful to you.
I just thought like it'd be really interesting if I had a very young kid and I have that conversation with them about, what things do you identify with and what things do you want this person that's just born into this world, how do you want them? So it could be life-changing for somebody. And I think that, we don't think of our spaces like that sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of things. I think that that's the case with most things in general. As I mentioned, the book is meant to apply across disciplines. So I think that's relevant in fashion. I think that's relevant in, as I mentioned, product design and industrial design and graphic design. Like what resonates with us? There are a couple of the, I guess, elements in our designer's toolkit that I specifically focus on in the book. Things like symbols or motifs or color. All of those things can have different meanings to us individually based on our cultural backgrounds, based on past experience. That if we don't make space for the conversation, we could inadvertently, incorporate something that is potentially harmful to someone based on what they associate with it.
Yeah, and that would be horrible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I read books every once in a while. No, I read books a lot. And because I've developed a relationship with them, sometimes I want a book to act as a Bible. Sometimes I want it to act as something that is a meditation. Sometimes I want this thing to just wake me up and smack me every once in a while when I get complacent or something. How would you like people to digest this?
So a lot of things went into the way I framed the book, I will say. One is that I'm a pretty concise communicator. So I wanted it to be something that people could digest easily. That also goes to my strategic communications background. One other element that kind of influenced the content was my background as a coach. I present opportunities in the book for people for some self-reflection. At the end of each of the chapters, there's a QR code to get to discussion questions.
Okay.
Because I feel like the book is going to be most impactful if people talk about it. So if students talk about it with a class, or they talk about it among themselves, or if design leaders talk about it with their teams. Yeah. So
I was even thinking about. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. So.
Oh no! I was just going to say too, and the last chapter is actually a set of worksheets for people to walk through with questions, asking yourself, like, how do you feel after all of this? What resonated with you about this? What do you want your legacy to be as a designer when it comes to identity? So that element kind of also was folded into the book too. I wanted it to be approachable and also something that we could that could be personally meaningful to us as we're experiencing it as individual readers, but also creating the opportunity for discussion.
Right. I've got two things. I hope I don't forget both of them. One, what you were talking about when you said asking somebody with what do they identify, very dangerous, but also very interesting question for social events, right? Because we always ask the boring questions. And I know it's a really bold question to ask. However, if you ask that question as opposed to something else, you could get into a very lengthy conversation. And I'm sure you could use other questions from your book to help continue that. Is that correct? Can I assume? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I would hope that there's plenty of other things that come up for people besides what I asked about. And that actually is the last question for each chapter in each set of discussion questions is what else came up for you as you were thinking through this and processing this?
Okay.
And, are there spaces?
Oh.
Sorry about that. Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
You're almost back.
I don't know what's going on. Having difficulty. Oh.
I think almost.
Oh, I don't know. I have to rejoin.
Okay.
Done. Let's see if, yeah. All right. I'll go back out and come back.
Okay. So, AAGD, Camille. Oh yeah, so I don't do as well talking by myself. I ask a million questions. So things we have coming up. The Black Maid Awards will be March 22nd, and what I think should happen based on this conversation is what I'm gonna. Hey, Derek, what's up? Based on this conversation, I think it'd be very interesting if what's standing on. Oh, what's standing about out about her conversation so far? Oh yeah, I was just thank you for asking that question, AAGD. Um, so it just really occurred to me that we should probably have groups because the questions that she's talking about answering are sometimes very deep and sometimes it makes people feel uncomfortable. But I know those are the questions or some of the questions that I have the good fortune of asking with AADD. And that's something I really didn't think about because we are African American graphic designers. We bring our identity to the table a lot of times. And it's very interesting to see how that can play out. And it's very interesting to see how people react when I can say, oh no, from a black point of view, this is why we would design it this way. And what I think the beautiful thing about the book is, and looking at design through diverse perspectives, is you can solve things in so many different beautiful ways. And I think that's what we're missing out on when we don't adopt the principles that you talk about in your book.
Definitely, definitely. And sorry for the hiccup there. But what's also interesting, what the book is also attempting to do is to create the space for us to share our perspectives as people with lived experience, whatever that lived experience may be, to be able to speak up in those conversations and say, hey, from my perspective, something about this is misaligned with my values or does not represent people like me in an equitable and fair and accurate way. And I also get into the point about the value that we bring into discussions with diverse customer groups, because we are going to be a lot more relatable to people who look like us than our counterparts are. So we are going to be able to create space for a whole different conversation. And we're also going to pick up on different cultural cues and unspoken things that are floating around in the room that other people who are not like us would not pick up on. And those things can be the game changers in terms of how we represent culture and identity in whatever the end product is. So we have that inside track. All of us who have been othered, we have the inside track on what is meaningful to us. And we have, not to say any one person, of course, can represent an entire demographic, but we can have a different kind of conversation than people who don't have any kind of similar lived experience in common.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can take this a couple of different ways, but I've been asking questions. I want to make sure that you get to talk about everything you want to talk about. So is there any question that I should ask you that I have not asked yet?
I don't think so. I think about what I would like this book to do, like ultimately. And I really do hope that this starts a conversation. I know that, it would probably be naive to think that, if one design team reads this week, that next week everything is going to be completely different. I don't anticipate that. But I do hope that this does spark conversation, even if it's, wow, we haven't talked about this before. Why haven't we talked about it? What could it look like if we do engage in these conversations? Who among us feels equipped to have these conversations with clients and with customers? But ultimately, my hope is that this becomes standard practice to talk about identity in the process. It may be bumpy. That's just like I see in working, with my DEI clients. We all have to adjust to having these conversations about things that we just typically have not. And I think we need to give ourselves a little grace for that too. But we can't keep leaning on the same excuses of, oh, it's going to take time. Oh, it's just too hard, et cetera, because if we keep that up, we will keep getting the same results.
Yeah, and I don't understand why designers aren't jumping towards trying to figure out how to hone this craft. Not just for their level of expertise, because it also helps with community.
Correct. It helps with so many things. And actually, I will always say I am not the one to run into the conversation about the business case for DEI. But there is a component of that in the book because I know the audience I'm talking to.
Right.
And there, some design leaders will probably be looking at this like, well, what does it mean to the bottom line?
Right.
So I do have a chapter that touches on the benefits and the risks of either showing up like this and having these conversations versus not. And it is very real in terms of the viability of businesses too. You look at how our cultures are changing, how demographics are shifting. There are going to be different voices that need to be heeded in terms of business decisions, in terms of recognizing the composition of our talent pools and what they'll be looking for, recognizing our customer bases and what they'll be looking for, the questions they're asking. Younger generations are asking a whole lot of different questions that I know my generation did not feel comfortable asking and raising their hands about, even from like interviews and saying, what are you really doing around DEI?
Right.
So organizations need to get on the ball. They're going to have to be able to answer those questions and point to evidence showing that they're doing something about it.
Right. I just thought for a second, it's like, I should get my daughter to read that book. Just because right now identity is so prevalent in her mind between social media and kids now being bold enough to say that they are not one thing or the other.
Right.
So it's a great tool for living, to be able to have these conversations.
Definitely. And it goes way beyond design. But if designers can get this started, in our profession, and it can branch out from there, I think that that's one of the impactful things I have seen in my work as a DEI officer, having had the past almost 3 years working with my own organization and having monthly conversations around these topics. What's been really inspiring to me is that I've been hearing my coworkers say, oh, I'm having conversations about this with my kids.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm having conversations about this at the table during Thanksgiving. So the idea that we can take these concepts outside of the context of work and really look at the fact that they touch every part of our lives, like that's inspiring to me. That's encouraging to me. And that's one of the things, like, we talk about potential outcomes from the book. If there are things that people pick up on in the course of reading that they're just like, oh, I'm not doing this in other areas of my life, or there are other opportunities to fold identity into this, then sure, if we learn to flex that muscle through our design process and then we can apply it elsewhere, I'm all for that too.
Yeah. Well, I did not give you a formal introduction, and so I assume people may want to know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
So I am, and I guess I could, well, my current position is I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer, as well as a DEIB consultant at a small consulting firm based in the DC area, where we focus on workplace culture. So internally, I have been doing this work of bringing my organization, our team, we're a small team of 10, but I have been doing the work of leading us as an organization through our DEIB journey, figuring out, what does this really mean to us as an organization? How do we want to engage around these topics? It's funny because my work around this started within my organization because my CEO said that she wanted inclusion to be one of our core values. And I asked the question, so what does that look like? What does that mean? And she was like, that's right.
Yeah.
So we got started by, I have a background in design thinking too. So I was like, let's do a design sprint about, how might we be more inclusive as an organization? And the insights that I got from there helped me those were actually formed the basis of the DEIB strategy I created for our organization, and also helped me get a sense of what path to go down in terms of learning around this topic for us as an organization. So what topics should we discuss? What is everyone kind of geared up and ready to dive into? So that was really helpful. And then in parallel with that work internally for my organization, I also do DEI consulting with outside clients, mostly around doing assessments of their DEI culture and helping them to strategize about transforming that and maturing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then in parallel with that, as I mentioned, I also do interior design and color consulting. So that's something I've been doing for about the past 15 years.
Okay. I immediately wanted to ask, and where do you find time to breathe? But we had a conversation about that, right?
That whirlwind we talked about at the beginning.
Yes. So I feel like asking questions can be very selfish sometimes, and I would love if somebody else had questions. If you do, please let us know. And if you don't, I'm just going to get all of Jessica that I can and get all the detail. And if I am overwhelming you, or if you have to go, please let me know. I think we might be slightly over time, but I really like talking to you, and that's how we got here. Yeah.
No, this is great. I'm open for questions too.
Okay. Amelia wants to know, what do you do as a color consultant?
Okay. So color has always been something that I was passionate about, even before I think I really grasped what design was overall. So during my interior design program, I found seminars about color, and I didn't plan on specializing in it. I just wanted to gain more information about it. But then I started getting requests from mostly some residential, some commercial clients about, I'm trying to figure out a palette for my house, or I moved into a new home. It's all like, builder's white paint. And I wanted to figure out my color scheme. And in some instances, they were business owners who were saying, I'm trying to figure out my branding, and I'd like to be intentional about the colors that I select. Like, what do they represent? What do they convey? And how should that incorporate into things like my logo as well as my space? So that's what I do with clients. Those are actually probably the two most common kind of inquiries I get, are clients who are looking for that kind of support. But in interior design, I also do more, around things like space planning, furniture, finish selection, and things like that. But color is where my heart lies.
Okay. Amelia, let us know if that answered your question, please. And then Terrence has another one. You mentioned strategic communication. Two things. I want to know more about that, what that means exactly, and then I want to know how you carried what you learned over from strategic communications into interior design.
Now that's interesting. So I will say my undergrad degree is in English. So I've had that kind of communications background and foundation through everything that I've done. And I mostly have applied it in the context of my management consulting career and that path, literally in terms of supporting executives, providing their actual communication, writing basically their script, writing their emails about, it could be about anything from, system rollouts. I did some IT consulting. It could be in the context of change management projects that I was on, where I would give them the verbiage to help build buy-in with their customer, with the workforce, give them that context and that verbiage also to explain an actual change, whatever that was going to be, whether, once again, it was a system deployment, or it was, we're going to be relocating our offices. Pre-pandemic, one of the things I was specializing in was helping to support an agency going from full-time in the office work to mobility and remote work and hybrid environments too. So all of that background, I think, was really helpful in terms of just really figuring out how to tailor messages to whoever I'm whoever the audience is,
Right.
into whatever the situation or scenario required. And that helped me actually, when I really think about it, in dealing with clients, because I think a lot of times we engage with a client and we have our expert hat on, right? So we're thinking in terms of, I know this and this and this and this, I know everything. Clients don't want to know everything. They want you to answer their questions.
Right.
So it helped me to pivot and say, okay, how do I support them and convey that I do understand them, I hear what they're saying, and I do have that expertise, but not overwhelm them, and
Right.
also invite them into the process as well.
Right.
So I think that's just one of the ways that that skill kind of shifted and kind of bridged those different
Yeah,
areas.
for me, that's one of the, how to communicate, how we communicate with our clients and our vendors and our family. That is like the most important thing in the entire world. I don't even care how good of a designer you are. If you don't have those skills, sometimes it can be detrimental to your career and relationships.
It really can. And that's one of the things that I talk about with, so I was on the Interior Design Advisory Council for the program that I came through. And having had this exposure, especially in management consulting, but just in general in the real world, I would often ask them, are you preparing students to tell the story? So not to just show up to a client presentation and be like, this is it. I did that. I picked this. I picked
Right.
that. That's not relevant to a client. A client, once again, wants you to answer their questions. They want you to solve their problem, and they want you to make it as clear and succinct as possible. They don't care why you picked, this color. They don't care why you decided that this was the best font to use
Right.
for this, like why those separate fonts look great together.
Right. Yep.
They don't care.
Not even
They want
necessarily pretty,
it's
clear.
clear. Exactly. That's what they want to know is, okay, well, and then also, how is this going to achieve my objective?
Mhm.
And how is it going to position me to either bring in more clients, to attract more customers,
Yeah.
to support my workforce with this space that you've created, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to learn a lot about storytelling,
Yeah.
I believe, as designers, because we also have to pitch. Our lives are selling. Like we don't
Tell
want to
'em.
talk about it that way,
Yeah, tell 'em.
but that is what we do.
Yeah, that's what we do. Sorry,
Right.
Al.
And as,
But then,
and
go
oh,
on.
no, I was just going to say, as unique as our concepts are, it doesn't mean anything if we can't explain it, if we can't sell someone on it. They may not care about the things that we thought were cool about it, or things that we thought were really unique.
Mhm.
Once again, they want to know, how are you solving my problem?
Yeah, and that's why there's so much bad design in the world, because certain people are just better at selling.
That's also an unfortunate outcome.
So I think our time is dwindling because the lovely Camille has given me the before it ends. And Camille, thanks for saving the day. So you wanted to talk about your blog, and I wanted to say something about a community, and then that's it. We're done.
Yeah, so I have, actually, I'd like to invite everybody to check out my website, jessicabantom.com, where you can actually access information about the book, and you can pre-order it there. But also, I have a blog called Start Where You Are that is intentionally, once again, going back to that idea of communication, very concise pointers, actually, for people to become more inclusive. And that came out of the summer of 2020, where I felt like the whole world was suddenly realizing I was Black and asking, oh my gosh, what can I do? What can I do?
Yeah.
They had their own awakening to social injustice. And I was like, well, if you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. So every entry in that blog is an answer. Here's something you can do. You can start looking into not just saying we support HBCUs, but look at what they specialize in. Recognize like the engineers come out of this school, designers, this one particular institution may be churning out the best designers in the industry. So things like that, everything from that to like doing a lot of self-reflection, asking yourself, like, what are you considering success when it comes to DEI?
Mm-hmm.
A whole range of things. So It's something people have reached out to me and said that they've started some good conversations from sharing those posts. I'll say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good conversation is everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Just like this one.
Right.
Okay, then I'm not going to say anything else about community. It has been a pleasure as always talking to you.
Great talking to you too. I know we could go on for a while,
I
but
know.
maybe at another date we can.
Part two.
Right.
All right. Thank you to all of you who showed up to ask questions and just give us support. Thanks to Camille. Thank you, Jessica. We'll do it again.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.